The following program about domestic violence may include content and discussions which may be descriptive and graphic in nature and is meant for mature audiences. This important series is meant to provide a realistic look at domestic violence, to share information and provide resources to not only survive, but thrive.
Black eyes, broken bones, bruises from head to toe. As horrible as they may sound, these are the physical wounds of domestic violence that often heal. But long after those scars go away, there are other wounds that can last a lifetime. Welcome to the 15%, a conversation on domestic violence. This is the final installment of our 4-part series taking a look at the impact of intimate partner abuse. I'm Mandrell Burks.
And I'm Dr. Denise McCain. Domestic violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime that occurs in the country, impacting men, women, and children. Throughout this series, we've heard the stories of survivors and their efforts to flee their abusers. But what happens when a victim actually does break free?
Now we're going to take a look at the life after domestic violence. What are some of the lingering issues survivors of abuse face, and what resources are available for survivors and perpetrators?
Now, we have two guests who can speak to the myriad of issues related to handling the pain left behind from domestic abuse. Dr. Spencer Simmons is the director of Synergy Family Services Incorporated. Dr. Simmons is a clinical social worker specializing in anxiety, depression, loss, and other issues. We're also joined by Nijima Smalls. She's an emotional coach and the author of Black Girls' Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds. Thank you both for joining us and for being here.
And Nijima, let's start with you. Now, people think that now that a victim of domestic violence has left the abuse, all should be well, but the reality is that's not necessarily the case. Talk to us about some of the challenges a survivor still faces.
Thank you, Mandrell, and thank you both for having me here tonight. Yes, a victim of abuse will definitely face some challenges, especially if they have not healed and dealt with it. One of the challenges they may face is being triggered. You know, anytime they're in a situation, and I know for me personally, as being a survivor of abuse in this type of manner, anytime I was faced with a situation in which I felt powerless, that would cause me to be triggered. And then in addition to that, if you haven't dealt with it and you haven't healed from it, you could be dealing with shame as well. And see, shame lives in our secrets. What we don't talk about comes back to haunt us. And so those are some of the things that really impact us. And especially with shame, shame impacts our self-esteem as well. And it damages us and how we feel the world views us and our self-worth. So that's why it's so necessary that we heal.
Absolutely.
Right.
Dr. Simmons, the same question to you, but from a different vantage point. You work also with perpetrators. Can you tell us where a perpetrator is when a victim has left, when they're no longer in that abusive relationship? Does the abuser go through the same thing, or what are they going through with the loss of having that person who they've been controlling in their lives?
And thank you, Mandrell and Dr. McCain, for having me on the show. The abuser or the perpetrator also suffers a series of losses. When they go through treatment, individual or group counseling, there's a sense of loss of identity, a loss of income, a loss of family. Then they form the bonds within the group. They connect to the other men within the group, and then once the group has ended, they experience another sense of loss throughout. Then when that is compounded with the potential loss of their spouse or partner, the individual's out feeling powerless and often hopeless.
Powerless and hopeless.
Yes.
Wow.
Due to the separation from their partner who they've been victimizing.
Separation from their partner and separation from the group.
Wow. So it's not just one particular incident when you're dealing with domestic abuse, because it could range, it can go all over the place. But Nijima, domestic violence tends to be generational. So, meaning that children who witness domestic violence have a greater chance of becoming a victim or perpetrator. So, talk to us about how to break that generational curse and the healing involved to do it.
That's such a great point, because the behavior that we witness as children becomes the behavior that we often repeat.
Right.
And so it's so important for us to develop self-awareness and to understand, to really see and understand how we're showing up, and understand which behaviors are positive and helpful to us and which behaviors we have adapted that are actually harming us. And this, part of this, we identify this through therapy. I'm a big proponent of therapy, particularly talk therapy, because this is where we can really understand who we are and how we're showing up in this world, and how we can take the steps to heal from those types of traumas.
Wow, great point.
So Dr. Simmons, give us a sense of, how you would say someone would move through this from your perspective. What does it take for someone to get from where they are to where they need to be based on the work that you're doing and what you've seen?
I think one of the major challenges for our men that as they attempt to move toward healing is that currently in the state of Maryland there are limited to no resources for men after they've completed treatment. So it's analogous to therapy, and when individuals enter our program for therapeutic services, there's no expectation that in 3 or 4 or 6 months that the individual will be completely healed. However, that's kind of the mandate regarding treatment for men, so that when 3, 4, 5 months they get a certificate, but there's no follow-up in terms of treatment services.
Wow.
So I think that's interesting, that you talk about 3, 4, 6 months. And I think personally that the treatment that batterers, abusers are receiving, generally it's court mandated, and it's really not necessarily to help them heal and overcome, but it's really more punitive in nature. So is that really going to achieve the goal that one would expect, which would be to help them move beyond, understand the behaviors if they actually think they're being punished?
I don't think so. If there's a sense of, for many of the men, I'm attending the group because there's a legality attached to this.
Right, because I have to.
I have to. It'll be a violation of probation. If I don't attend, there'll be legal consequences. The value in treatment for them is often lost on what do I need to do just to complete the group, not so much as what do I need to do to work on the self.
Right. So with these men, when they come to counseling, and once they mandate that counseling and they're done with that, do you feel that oftentimes they need more sessions just to help them understand what they're doing? Like after they get those a certain number of sessions, they think that's over and they think they're healed and nothing can change what they've been doing.
I think that's a great point, Mandrell, is that additional sessions could be helpful. And we've actually had men to ask for, can I continue treatment? And I think it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all treatment model for men. Some may need additional individual counseling. Some may need simply a support group.
Right.
Some may need couples counseling. But to be able to offer that kind of continuum, that cadre of services post-treatment, I think could be beneficial to our male perpetrators.
So on that same subject, what about the victim? How does someone who's in an abusive relationship, perhaps for a very long period of time, know and understand that they need help, that they need to reach out and get counseling? When does that happen for a victim?
It happens at different times for different people, and that's the difficult part about it is, as we are their loved ones, members of their community. You want them to get help and get out of the situation as soon as possible. But, you know, everyone has to arrive at that point on their own. And unfortunately, it's nothing that we can force. But
Or should it be?
Nor should it be, exactly. But it's just when the victim decides that they want better, that they deserve better, that they're worth more than the way they're being treated and abused.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, the reality is that it's not just a matter of leaving. We know there are other steps involved to truly being free from domestic abuse even after leaving. We had a chance to sit down with award-winning actress and gospel sensation Tamala Mann. We asked her about finding the strength and courage to leave an abuser.
We allow our fear to overtake us. We allow, see, it's like I'm afraid the one thing that, and I've never been in this, well, kind of sort of, I wasn't being beat, but I was just listening at the abuse that my mom was dealing with my stepfather. And he was in the ministry. He was, you know, he was in church, but he would fuss so much and so heavenly that, you know, I left home at 16 because I was just so sick of him just hearing his voice and hearing him fuss at her and fuss about everything that everybody did. And it really was nothing. But I think my fear at first was saying like, man, where you gonna go? What can you do? But now there's so many different resources and help out here for women and families that when I was younger, it wasn't as much. It was some help out there, but it wasn't as much help as being offered today. So I would tell people not to allow your fear to overtake you. And some things we have to do it afraid. You want to leave him, you want to leave her, do it afraid. It's like, because if you can just have a little faith that I can go out and I can start over. Because sometimes some people don't want to leave their situations that, even though it's crazy, but at least they do have a home, you know, a shelter over the heads of their children, and we can go in the refrigerator and get something to eat. But when you feel like you're leaving all these things, and it's like, I don't know what I'm finna walk into, and I don't even know how we gonna eat. Just believe and not allow the fear. This is what the Lord has given me to say to y'all or whoever's watching, that don't allow it to hold you captive. So I would start with there, to not to be fearful that things are not going to get better, because it can.
Pushing past the fear. Definitely one of the tools to get to the other side of abuse. We heard that. So Dr. Simmons, what does it take for one to push past that fear to get to the other side?
I think there has to be recognition of the individual responsibility, the willingness to overcome that stigma of help-seeking behavior that's kind of profound within the Black and brown communities, the willingness to lean on potential support systems.
So those are some of the things that you think are holding people back, in other words, from moving beyond the place that they're in.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Nijima, what do you think about that, pushing past the fear? What does that look like? What does one have to do to get beyond that space?
What does one have to do to get beyond pushing past the fear? I think, you know, we have to really dig down to what fear is, dig deep down into that part of it, and realize, you know, really look at what are we afraid of, you know, and really say to ourselves, you know, I don't have to worry about what anybody else thinks of me. I'm going to be okay. And push past that to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves.
But you know, but they use push past the fear, and when you think about the obstacles that victims go through, like I have to leave my home, I have to move into a shelter, I have to relocate, I have to find a new job, I have to find a level of stability and a resource, I have to go to court, I have to pay a lawyer. Pushing past the fear with all of that pressure, it seems like you might get to first base with me with all of the stuff, that baggage, but I'm not going to complete that entire safety plan. And I might get tired and go back to the abuser because I cannot follow this plan. It's too overwhelming.
And I'm glad you said that, because the other thing, let's be real, fear is real.
It's real.
Fear is real.
Fear
Yes,
is
it is.
real.
Yes, it
So
is.
to say push past the fear for someone who's been threatened, who has potentially seen their life flash before them in seconds at the hands of their abuser, is real. So again, you know, we're saying push past the fear, but I think we have to also be realistic and recognize that fear is real and victims have some things to be concerned about. And likewise, I think perpetrators do as well. You know, there is fear associated with whether it be going through a system, getting treatment, or just fear of becoming someone that they don't know that they can be. You know, they've lived lives as the people that they are, and now you want me to be someone else. It can be frightening.
Is that a mental mindset that makes someone go back to the abuser because they need the support, because they feel like they don't have it within themselves, so they need the support from the abuser, if that makes any...
It certainly does. That's where you mentioned benefit of mental health and therapy can be so beneficial in the treatment that needs to come from within.
Another misnomer, and I'm sorry, another misnomer is that people don't realize, and this is of course a characteristic which you can certainly speak to, Dr. Simmons, is that abusers are generally, they have low self-esteem. You know, people don't recognize that, but that's one of the reasons why they abuse, is because they don't feel good about themselves. So that also, I think, feeds into or plays a big part in their inability to move on, because it's forcing them to do some self-examination and perhaps coming to terms with who they are and, moreover, who they are not.
Or do they emulate their parents' behavior from childhood? Is that one of those indicators as far as why they abuse? Because I found an interesting strategy from a prior guest that said she was an abuser because she did not want to go back to the life of being a victim, which I thought was pretty interesting, because I never had that perspective explained to me before. What are your thoughts on that when you look at what she stated?
It's often generational, and as Dr. McCain mentioned, there is the domestic violence we know is about power and control. And for the perpetrators, if I don't have often, in many instances, a sense of power and control over many other areas of my life, except my home. And if now you're saying I have to learn alternate coping mechanisms, then what's going to replace that power and that status that I'm receiving right now from exerting control over my partner?
Right. So Nijima, you wrote a book really dedicated to this issue of healing, specifically Black girls. How does a Black woman, a Black girl, heal from the wounds of being abused emotionally, mentally, physically? How does one go about doing that? Talk to us about the book.
I think with the Black Girl's Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds, I talk about all the wounds that we as Black women, Black girls, that we deal with. At the end, I give a prescription for healing. And it starts off with, you got to build self-awareness. You got to understand who you are, your triggers. We do some trigger mapping in the book. And I also think what's key is that we learn how we got to this point, right? Because if we don't really do the work, peel back those layers to really understand how we got here, and how, for those of us that are in situations that are abusive, maybe marriages or relationships, why we stayed. And that's hard. That's really hard to look in the mirror and really look at yourself and say, you know, I stayed because of whatever the issue may be. But then we got to move to acceptance, right? You got to accept that this happened to you. We can't wrestle with it. We got to...
No. I was just thinking while the name of your book, and then you said it addressed Black girls. Do you believe that the suggestions you made for young girls would apply to young men?
I do think some of them definitely will apply to men. Yes, absolutely. I think as our Black men, they need to take a long look at themselves as well. And I think as Black women that are raising Black men, I think we have to look at how we raise them, how we nurture our Black men, okay? Because and it's not just black men, it's men in general, right? We're seeing right now what's coming out of the light with all these different situations. We have a bunch of men that are angry. We have a bunch of men that have been abusers, and and part of that is a lack of self-control, you know? And we don't often raise our men to have self-control sometimes.
I don't think we have resources for men. I think we have more resources for women, don't get me wrong, and less resources for men, but we're asking the same questions and we want more resolutions, but it's like, let's even the playing field for resources if you expect to see something change. You can't apply resources to, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just making an opinion. If you apply 90% of resources to one side and 10% of resources to the other side, you can't expect the same outcome for change.
Well, I mean, I would add to that, but also say, you know, within a community, and I'm just saying, you know, specifically African American community, we tend to shy away from getting help. You know, Dr. Simmons, you talked about help-seeking behaviors. I would subscribe and say that you have to want to take advantage of those resources that are there for you. Absolutely. And I don't think men are as open, and certainly I'm generalizing here, I'm not saying all men, but I don't think most men or many men are as open to getting help as women are.
I
So
agree.
that is part, and I think that does play into why you may see more resources for women as opposed to men. And also, let's also take this to another level. When we talk about abuse, victimization, the overwhelming majority of victims, those that need that kind of support, are women. So that's where and why you're going to have more resources. Not to say that men don't need them. I'm certainly agreeing with you on that side, but it's whether or not they're going to take advantage of them. We just said that they're in treatment because they're court mandated. Right. You know?
I'm going to let Doctor pick up on that because I want to hear his thoughts on there, but I knew we would end up going there. And I knew you were going to respond. So, Dr. Simmons, first and foremost, do you believe that the resources for women are more, there are more resources for women than men, across the scale, as far as expression?
Unquestionably, there's significantly more. I think he came up with a 90%.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're making that point, that's what I'm saying. See, he's significantly.
Well, I don't think any service provider, yourself included, would say, I'm only offering services to women. So, you know, no one is not allowing men to take advantage of those services. My point was, do they and will they?
Do we have to find a strategy to meet men? Like, we found a strategy to figure out how to meet women. Do we really have to brainstorm and figure out how do we get a group of men together and have this conversation? Because I will tell you, once I do speak to, and we have that conversation, they're engaged. They want to know, you know, how to help themselves. But I just think that we just need to come up with a strategy of how do we get men in that building. And I do truly believe that they will share what they're suffering from. We just got to figure out how to get to them and provide a response from a Dr. Simmons and provide them a resource for their daughters, maybe your book, and they could probably find some resources within your book to help themselves. So that's what I'm saying. So.
Well, I guess this is one of those conversations that we could have and debate for quite some time, but unfortunately we are just about out of time, as things would be. But before we go, I do want each of you to give our viewers a few takeaway points. You know, we're talking about life after domestic violence. How do you get there? And make sure that you don't repeat the pattern, because we do know that it is a vicious cycle. How do we get there? How do individuals move beyond where they are and not repeat that pattern? So, Dr. Simmons, I'll start with you.
I think it comes with some self-awareness and the willingness to be open to treatment, to ask the questions, even if the resource doesn't exist, which we talked about currently they do not, but for men to feel comfortable to say, it's okay, I need help. I can reach out to my provider, and then place the onus of responsibility back on the provider to be able to find that additional assistance that they need.
Okay. And Nijima, your response?
There is life. I think people need to know there is life after abuse. Regardless of what side of abuse you've been on, there is life after abuse. But you have to take the initiative to find life after abuse and decide what life after abuse looks like for you. You have to do the work. You have to heal. You have to find community. Find that group, find those people, because again, the shame lives in our secrets, and that will tear away at our self-esteem and our self-worth and put us back into bad patterns. So find that community, be open with that community, do the work, regardless of how much work it takes. Therapy, coaching, reading, going to seminars, whatever it takes, be willing to do that. But regardless of whether you've been raped, abused, or whatever the case is, you can still have a great life today.
And I think it's important that you said, do the work, but also it's going to look different for everybody. What works for you may not work for me.
Absolutely.
But you have to be willing to take that initiative and do the self-examination, which is not easy.
It's not.
It's not easy, but I would also encourage individuals to get the help from professionals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's critical. You can't do it by yourself.
And there's no time limit on speaking out. As prior cases will show in the news, when that time when you feel it's right to speak up and speak out, it's okay. It therapeutically, if I'm speaking correctly, is it okay for a victim to come forth 5 years later and say, hey, I was abused? Is it, I don't want people to think that they should suppress what they're going through. It happened 5 years ago, I've moved on. Do they need to go back and just release that pressure?
Yeah, there's no time limit on trauma. So at any point that individual may need assistance, they should reach out.
You should reach out. Great job. Amazing advice. That's all the time we have. We want to thank all of our guests for joining us for this important 4-part series, The 15%, a conversation on domestic violence. There are resources that will be listed shortly on your screen. You do not have to suffer in silence. Tell a trusted loved one. Reach out to a certified domestic violence agency and safely make a plan. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to those who truly love you. I'm Mandrell Burks.
And I'm Dr. Denise McCain. Together, we can break the silence of domestic violence.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at whut.org. Thank you.